America's News Headquarters, I'm Eric Shawn.
And I'm Arthel Neville. The president embarking on what he calls a mission of peace and describing the historic summit as a great opportunity for Kim Jong-un and his downtrodden people. President Trump facing what is probably his toughest test yet on the foreign policy front as he tries to broker a deal to denuclearize the Korean peninsula. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham on Sunday Morning Future is telling Maria Bartiromo he believes North Korea sees President Trump as very different from past administrations.
The only reason North Korea is sitting down at the table with Trump is that they believe for the first time that they've got somebody in the White House they don't know how to deal with, and Trump's goal is to eliminate their nuclear missile program, not contain it, and I think he's got North Korea and China's attention.
Greg Palcott is live in Seoul, South Korea, from the region most affected by the summit. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Arthel. That's right. Probably few places in the world are watching this Singapore summit involving President Trump and Kim Jong-un closer than the folks here in South Korea. Here in Seoul, we're just about 30 miles away from that very tense DMZ. That's why South Koreans are watching President Trump, who is already in Singapore, getting ready for one day before the summit activity. They're hoping that he is going to make some kind of deal regarding the nuclear weapons of Kim Jong-un. It's not quite clear what Kim Jong-un will do. They have watched for years North Korea make threats. Last year it went to the absolute brink, and they've been listening to the rhetoric coming from both sides. It's gotten very tense. They're also hoping, Arthel, that some kind of movement might be made to end the Korean War. Fighting stopped 65 years ago, but only with a truce. There are some signs that there could be some moves on Tuesday at the summit towards that end. But Arthel, from everybody I've been speaking to here in the past day, South Koreans have been down this peace road before. I think the best way to describe their mood is hopeful but cautious.
Okay, and Greg, by the way, any reaction about North Korea?
Yeah, from North Korea. This is the most interesting part of the story. They don't even really know that it's going on, at least the citizens of North Korea. Yes, they know that their leader is meeting with President Trump, but apparently the state media, the propaganda apparatus, has not let them know exactly when this is happening or where this is happening. They're holding off on those crucial details, apparently, just in case it doesn't exactly go to plan. Still, no real matter, according to the analysts that, again, we've been speaking to in the past day or so. This summit is not really about the common folks in North Korea. It's about securing Kim's position. It's about security reassurances to his regime and the overall improvement of the economy. As for how much Kim Jong-un will give up to come halfway at least towards President Trump of the United States, well, everybody in the region watching and waiting. Back to you.
Greg Palcott, live in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you. Eric?
President Trump, of course, will be the first sitting U.S. president to ever sit down with a North Korean leader as he tries to strike a deal with a longtime hostile U.S. adversary. So what can we realistically expect? Christian Whiten is a former State Department senior advisor for Presidents Donald Trump and George W. Bush, and Georgia's now. You know, Christian, Kim rules a state that imprisons and executes its people. It puts them in gulags. It starved an estimated 1 million people during the famine. And it's repeatedly threatened to demean us. So does this perhaps signal that perhaps can start to change?
Well, that's the hope, but that's not really the top of the agenda. The top of the agenda has to be our own security, at least the top of the United States agenda, the security of the American people. But there's been a longstanding view by presidents of both parties that a country that doesn't trust its citizens, that doesn't respect the rights of its own citizens, isn't going to respect the rights of its neighbors. And clearly North Korea is really the worst human rights abusers to its own people, to Americans who have been unfortunate enough to travel there and be taken hostage, to Japanese citizens who've been held hostage there for decades. So, you know, in the back of your mind, it's important to remember this is still a thug regime that's very evil.
So how does the President of the United States deal with the thug regime?
Well, you basically can't trust their words. It has to be judging them based on their actions. You know, if you look at what Secretary of State Pompeo has said, his remarks haven't gotten a tremendous amount of press, but have been very telling that he thinks, and he's talked with Kim more than any American, that Kim may be contemplating a very different path. And hopefully, if they choose this path, it won't just be on nuclear issues, but would be sort of a broader liberalization, a broader engagement with the world on economics that could then lead to some breakdown in the prison state they run.
Do you think Kim, because he's a different generation than his father and his grandfather, I mean, he sees the rest of the world, he watches the media, he knows how the rest of the world lives, even though some of his own people may not. Do you think he really now wants to reach out, that he is sincere in claiming that he will denuclearize his country, yet the denuclearization could mean two different things to us and to Pyongyang?
I think it could, and that I think will be a big issue coming out of the summit, because obviously we have a view of denuclearization. That means the removal, essentially, of all nuclear materials and processes and capabilities from North Korea. They may at first try and pull a fast one. I don't think it'll work, and say, oh, that just means taking warheads off of missiles, taking physics packages out of warheads, something like that.
Is that something we should accept?
No, I think the president has been very clear: complete, verifiable, irreversible disarmament, and that will be a much bigger process. If you look at other processes, other countries that have done this, like Libya, their programs were much smaller. If you look at the Jong nuclear facility that produces nuclear fuel from which you can derive your plutonium-239, we're going to need all of that nuclear waste, that spent fuel, out of the country, for example, and just the logistics of that alone will be big. You don't need to solve all that in Singapore. You need a meeting of the minds between Trump and Kim, the two people capable of making those choices.
And you think we'll get that meeting of the minds? You think they'll achieve that?
I wouldn't bet the farm, but I am cautiously optimistic. I think we see something very different from Kim, and that he may also be calculating. And if you look, he did replace his top 3 military people recently, so he may be repositioning his regime with the view that the best way for his regime to survive is actually to take this step, not to try, as his father did twice, to pull a fast one on the United States.
So how do you see this playing out? Some have said, well, it should be immediate. Others say a phased denuclearization, but then there is the concern that phasing this out, or phasing it through a time period, is only giving them a chance to perfect their delivery capability and their ballistic missile systems.
My view, based just on hunch, is that they actually have a perfected delivery system. The only way we've seen multi-stage intercontinental missiles, we've seen the test of a reported hydrogen bomb. It may just be a boosted fission bomb, but 200 kilotons anyway. That's a big deal. The only thing we don't know for certain is if they have a survivable and well-targeted reentry vehicle, but that's really not the hardest part of the program. Again, it's a very complex program, so even a complete agreement for full disarmament is going to take some time, and the president has signaled repeatedly there may have to be future meetings, either at his level or certainly at lower levels. So I think, yeah, it's going to be, I don't know if you'd want to call it phase, but it's not going to be, victory by Wednesday.
Well, at first, yeah, certainly. At first, the administration was saying that they want something immediately. Let me play you a soundbite of John Bolton in the last appearance here on the Fox News channel as a contributor, now, of course, the National Security Advisor, in March, telling me that, well, if there is a meeting, it should be quick. It should end quickly if Kim does not agree to denuclearize. Here's Ambassador Bolton.
We'll show you where they end up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, right next to the Libyan nuclear weapons program. That's talking about denuclearization.
Yeah, but what if they say no?
Anything else is just a waste of time.
Yeah, what if they say
then
no?
It's a short meeting.
A short meeting?
Short meeting. Okay, fine.
So what changed?
It's, again, this signal that's been verified repeatedly by Secretary Pompeo in person that Kim may be pursuing a different path. Then just the fact that the summit got scheduled and then canceled by Trump. I think they know we mean business because we already walked away from this one time. We haven't really detailed what it took to get it back on, but it probably took, frankly, Kim, if not coming with hat in hand, it was on him to get it back on, and he did. Also, you have the president coming off of what I think, experts disagree on this, but I think was a very strong performance at the G7 summit in Quebec, where, again, the president showed he's not going to be browbeaten into something that's not in the interest of the United States. So that clear willingness to walk away. But John is fundamentally right. If the North Koreans show up and it's more of give us money in exchange for promises before we do anything, then I think the president will walk out fast. I just hope that doesn't happen, and I don't think it will.
Yeah, do you think that they'll end up with some type of framework or some type of plan, at least, to begin the next process in terms of denuclearization?
Yes, and I think that's the fundamental hurdle, that meeting of the minds and then sort of a concept and a framework for what goes next and, actual steps. With the Soviets, it was trust but verify was what Reagan's watchword was. With North Korea, I think it's distrust and verify. We're going to want to see actual actions and hopefully no goodies, no food aid or energy assistance that can be easily monetized by the regime, either from us or from South Korea, whose government is much more inclined toward appeasement than the United States or Japan. Instead, the goodies, frankly, for North Korea on this should be a chance to join the world system, a reduction in sanctions once they have done real things, but not a pot of gold.
And do you think that is exactly what Kim wants to and hopes to achieve himself?
Yeah, again, it'll be very interesting to see if they want, once again, to sort of jerk us around and pull a fast one and, pocket as much aid as they can, because that is what they've repeatedly done and did in particular in the Bush administration, which I saw, and in the Clinton administration. So hopefully not. And that will be sort of the telltale. If you see the president come out of this quickly, if you see a talk about restoring maximum pressure, then things will have gone badly, presumably because North Korea did what we, fear they may do. But, I'd sort of optimistic that that won't be the case.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see what happens Tuesday. The whole eyes of the world are on it. Christian Whiten, thank you so much, as always.
Thanks, Eric.
Of course.
And there is very sad news to report today about a fallen hero. The Pentagon identifying the U.S. Special Operations soldier who was killed in Somalia. He is 26-year-old Staff Sergeant Alexander Conrad of Chandler, Arizona. Sergeant Conrad served two tours of duty in Afghanistan and had received numerous awards. U.S. Africa Command says 4 other U.S. soldiers were also wounded during Friday's attack. The radical Islamic group Al-Shabaab claiming responsibility.
4 days from now, the Justice Department's watchdog releases that highly anticipated report from the Inspector General. It's about the FBI's handling of Hillary Clinton's email probe. What do you think is in it? What will it say? We'll take a look straight ahead. Plus, there's new fallout from the G7 summit in Canada as the U.S. engages in a war of words with one of our top allies. How this escalating feud over trade is playing out. That next.
We had some strong, firm conversations on trade and specifically American tariffs. I reiterated to President Trump that these tariffs threaten to harm industry and workers on both sides of our border.
One person is dead, another critically injured when a house explodes in Ohio. The blast leveling a home in East Cleveland this afternoon. Pieces of wood and debris scattering the lawn and street. Officials say neighboring homes were also damaged in the explosion, knocking out some windows and causing other homes to catch fire. No details have been released yet about the cause.
And besides the Singapore summit, there is another big story to tell you about today. All those disputes over trade are escalating between the U.S. and some of our closest allies. This after President Trump withdrew his support from the final G7 statement in Canada. Germany and France blasting that move, saying that it undermines trust. But White House advisor Peter Navarro, he had some sharp words today, pushing back against the criticism. He warns when it comes to trade and tariffs, it can no longer be business as usual.
On the issue alone, we have allies strategically, but when it comes to these trade disputes, these allies basically are robbing us blind. The president is not going to put up with that.
Ellison Barber live on the details in Washington. Hi, Ellison.
Hi, Eric. The president agreed to the G7's final statement. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that all 7 countries agreed to it. Then President Trump tweeted something else entirely, writing, quote, based on Justin's false statement at his news conference and the fact that Canada is charging massive tariffs to our U.S. farmers, workers, and companies, I have instructed our U.S. reps not to endorse the communique as we look at tariffs on automobiles flooding the U.S. market. In another tweet, President Trump called the prime minister dishonest and weak. At the press conference that seemingly sparked the president's tweets, Trudeau said Canada would move forward with retaliatory tariffs starting July 1st.
I highlighted directly to the president that Canadians did not take it lightly, that the United States has moved forward with significant tariffs on our steel and aluminum industry, particularly did not take lightly the fact that it's based on a national security reason.
Some members of Congress say the president's response crossed a line and he is alienating key allies.
this wasn't just with Trudeau. This is with our best allies, 7 best allies. And it seems to me not to sign a statement of solidarity, which stands for everything that we stand for, is a big mistake. I understand the president was upset. The president could have said that, but to walk away from our allies in this way, I think is a mistake.
The White House, however, is not backing down.
We compromised on the communique. We joined the communique in good faith. They have this bilateral meeting. We were very close to making a deal with Canada on NAFTA, bilaterally perhaps, and then we leave and Trudeau pulls this sophomoric political stunt for domestic consumption. It's a betrayal.
Republican Senator John McCain criticized the president's actions, tweeting in part, "To our allies, Americans stand with you, even if our president doesn't." Eric?
All right, Allison, thanks so much. Arthel?
Eric, for more on this, let's bring in Al Weaver. He's political reporter for the Washington Examiner. So, Al, I want to start here. Let's start by talking about what was accomplished at the summit.
Well, I think this really shows that President Trump at this point is kind of on an island with this whole tariff situation. You mentioned the G7 situation. The comments with Prime Minister Trudeau, Prime Minister May, and Chancellor Merkel. This shows that the president right now is on an island, and he's really
so I asked if we could start with what was accomplished. Do we have anything that was accomplished there? I want to start with the positive.
Well, obviously the NAFTA thing, the bilateral negotiations on NAFTA is a really big thing for the White House and for the administration. They've been trying to get a deal on that for a little bit now, but this is, an issue right now. It plays into this larger tariff situation, plays in this larger tariff talk. It's been a big issue for this White House moving forward as they try to regain their economic message, and it's been an issue. But the NAFTA negotiations, that's something that could help, and also the president laying out that maybe we go with no tariffs, and we have break all the guardrails on trade talks. That's something that was looked at positively by some of the members of the G7, but it's also it's in stark contrast to the tariffs that he's been laying out there over the last month.
And then we have this, which is now a very public tension between President Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. What will become of this, are you thinking?
Well, one thing right now is the White House, they're obviously focused on these Trudeau comments. You saw what happened to the Sunday Morning with Peter Navarro and Larry Kudlow on Sunday Morning TV. But right now, the White House, they're really trying to flip the script at this point as they move on to the Singapore summit. That's a big issue for the White House right now. The president, he made the point, I didn't have to come to this G7 up to Quebec. I have this big meeting in Singapore coming up with Kim Jong-un where I'm trying to make world peace. I didn't have to do this. This is a chance for the White House to flip the script a little bit and get back on message a little bit and show a little and get some wins that the president always talks about.
Well, the president was there and he withdrew support for that joint statement issued by the G7 nations. If there appears to be division among the U.S. and its allies, who is lying in wait to take advantage of that, and how could they use it to their advantage?
Well, that's a good question. I think right now the president, he's got a conundrum on his hand. He's been really pushing these tariffs the last couple of weeks, and the one thing that's really surprising to me, or maybe not surprising, but it's noticeable, is Republicans have been very willing to back him on many things. They've been willing on the Mueller investigation, on a myriad of issues that that otherwise they may break from. Tariffs have been the one issue where they've no issue breaking from them specifically. It's almost en masse. You have an amendment by Bob Corker possibly being slipped into the NDAA in the coming weeks, and that's something the White House obviously doesn't want. It's these free trade types in the Republican ranks that are really trying to take advantage of this and use it toward their advantage.
I want to move here now. In the wake of the G7 summit, will President Trump be viewed as a tough negotiator who stands up for the United States, or the leader of the free world who doesn't understand his power and place in world politics?
Well, I think we're going to have to wait and see on that one. I'm not sure if that's going to come out in the next couple of days. We have to see what happens with this North Korea summit. As I mentioned, that could really change the narrative for the White House. But eventually it's going to get back to these tariffs, and it's going to come back to what does the president get out of these negotiations, especially with Canada and the EU. They're two of our biggest trading partners. They're two of our biggest allies also, which is why a lot of Republicans have come out against this move by the president. It's going to take some time to see what happens, but I think a good start for him could come from these Kim Jong-un negotiations in Singapore.
And everyone's hoping for good results out of that meeting. Meanwhile, President Trump saying at the G7 that Russia should be readmitted to the G7, returning it to G8. And today, Russian President Vladimir Putin says he welcomes President Trump's suggestion. How does this position President Trump?
Well, the thing that was interesting to me is he got some backup from the Italian Prime Minister over this last day. No, I mean, this is going to be a big issue. It's something we're going to hear a lot about on Capitol Hill in the next couple of days. Republicans are really, they're not exactly pleased by this move, needless to say. A lot of them want the president and the White House to take a tougher stand on Russia. They think that he's been weak on this. They think he hasn't come out forcefully enough against them. I think we're going to hear a lot on Capitol Hill in the next few days about this G7 and possibly return to a G8. And it's not something many people want at this point, other than the White House.
And finally, returning back to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada and President Trump and the talk of tariffs. Do you think that if President or Prime Minister Trudeau comes out publicly and says, you know what, my bad, I probably shouldn't have said that, could have called him directly on the phone and talked about this, not publicly. It seems from what I hear from Larry Kudlow that that's what they're wanting, some sort of public apology or admission that they made a mistake, he made a mistake. If that does happen, can the talks of tariffs and maybe getting rid of it, returning or getting to free trade, could that possibly get back on track?
Possibly, but I still think that's a little bit unlikely. I mean, Prime Minister Trudeau has come out and said, what I've said in this press conference isn't anything different than I've said to the president behind closed doors and in public also. So, I'm not sure I expect that at this point. However, the president really needs to get these negotiations with Canada back on track. He made the one faux pas he made is in his tweet where he mentions this was a response to the dairy tariffs that Canada slapped on the U.S. Well, and the president by slapping these tariffs on the EU, on Canada and such, he's come out and said, well, this is for a national security purpose. Obviously in the tweet, he makes it known that it's not for a national security purpose, that it's for net retribution and as a response to Canada. So I think that's something he's going to have to answer for in the next couple of days and in the coming weeks.
Well, lots happening in the next coming weeks, and we will be talking to you again. Al Weaver, political reporter from the Washington Examiner. Thank you.
Thanks, Arthel.
Well, back to President Trump coming face-to-face with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un in just well under 2 days. We're looking ahead to that high-stakes meeting, and we're getting some new reaction from Capitol Hill.
President Trump's upcoming meeting on Tuesday with Kim Jong-un is grabbing worldwide attention, and there is plenty of reaction from lawmakers here at home. Garrett Tenney is live in Washington with more. So, Garrett, tell us, what role will Congress play in a deal with North Korea?
Well, Arthel, it was Congress that enacted a lot of the sanctions North Korea is under, and any deal would almost certainly include easing those sanctions, which Congress would need to vote on. But even bigger than that, President Trump does not want to see a repeat of what happened with the Iran nuclear deal, where the next administration can come in and unilaterally cancel the agreement. So the White House plans to do what the Obama administration didn't and go through Congress to have any deal ratified as a treaty. Doing that would require at least some Democratic support, and this week, top Democrats laid out what they need to see in a deal in order to support it. Here's the top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee this morning on ABC's This Week.
Our concern here, the president has gone into a high-wire act without a safety net, and the preparation for this type of summit, while we applaud robust diplomacy, the preparation for this type of summit to test the proposition of what Kim Jong-un is really willing to do or not has not taken place. And so this is a bit of a risk.
And Democratic leadership has said it will not support any deal or sanctions relief that doesn't include North Korea dismantling its entire nuclear program and agreeing to open inspections to verify that that's happened. Arthel?
Meanwhile, Garrett, though, what are Republicans saying about those demands from Democrats?
Well, Senator Lindsey Graham says he agrees with those stipulations, but he also believes that in order for the president to negotiate from a position of strength, North Korea needs to believe that the U.S. is willing to use military force if diplomacy fails.
Here's my challenge to every Democrat and Republican. You need to help the president where you can, not undercut him. Writing a letter telling him what a good deal it should be is good, only if you're willing to back it up with the use of military force.
So far, leading Democrats have said it is too early in this process for them to consider that idea, and it is not something they're willing to do purely for the negotiations. Arthel?
Garrett Tinney, thank you very much.
And the G7 summit, as we have been reporting, while ending with world leaders bitterly disagreeing about trade. The president, though, says he doesn't plan to back down. But if he imposes tariffs on products like steel, other countries are now threatening to retaliate. Potentially, some say that could result in a trade war. So let's talk about how this could impact us and American business and your pocketbook. Managing Director at Cornell Capital, Ann Berry, joins us now here in the studio. So, Ann, what would the impact be if, as threatened, tariffs are slapped on our products by, let's say, Canada?
Well, I think they're going to be twofold waves of response. I think the first you'll see in the near term is definitely in the stock market. Nothing gives the market greater agita than uncertainty and not knowing what prices are going to look like for exports. And then the second wave, if indeed the tariffs do go in place, is what does that mean for consumers? Will you expect to see inflation start to pick up as some of these really key input prices tick up as the tariffs take place?
So increased tariffs can cause heightened inflation?
Well, if you think about the tariffs that the United States could place on imports of steel and aluminum, for example, what you'd expect to see is the price of those imports going up within the United States. And as that ricochets into, for example, the construction industry or the auto industry or the manufacturing industry, where steel and aluminum are very important input prices, you may see that being passed on to the consumer.
And what about on the other side, our products? I mean, for example, the president was saying that there's a 277% tariff on our dairy products going abroad. I mean, that's unbelievable. That's almost 300%. So that's one thing he says is very unfair. Does he have a point?
Well, I think if you actually talk about what does that mean mathematically, it means absolutely a dairy product in the United States that would be sold into Canada is more than 3 times more expensive than it would be without, nearly 3 times expensive it would be without that tariff. But I think when you think about the complexity of this network, right, it's not just one product versus another. This is really about the global system, the global stability of trade that we've seen over many, many decades suddenly being thrown into enormous uncertainty. And that causes enormous skittishness for U.S. businesses as they think about how to invest.
You know, a lot of American workers say that, well, it was the tariffs and the global trade pacts threw them out of work. I mean, you just go to some of the shuttered factories, they blame NAFTA and this sort of thing. So what would you say to them who think that we have actually been very deeply hurt by the global economic system?
I think it's a very complicated story. And actually, even recently, the United Steelworkers actually came out and said, you know what, tariffs in Canada is a step too far. So even in that instance where you've got a pocket of workers who are exactly delivering the kind of message you were talking about and now coming out and saying, you know what, Canada's an ally. The complexity is a little bit more than is being debated in the public eye. We need to take a step back before we start seeing these punitive measures coming into place.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has some sharp words about the tariffs and the president in the wake of the G7 meeting. To take a listen to what Mr. Trudeau just said.
Insulting. And I highlighted that it was not helping in our renegotiation of NAFTA, and that it would be with regret, but it would be with absolute certainty and firmness that we move forward with retaliatory measures on July 1st, applying equivalent tariffs to the ones that the Americans have unjustly applied to us.
So he said that last night at the end of the meeting. So if on July 1st, Canada does impose new tariffs on the imports from here, what do you expect will happen, or do you think that both sides will ratchet it down?
I'm hoping that both sides will ratchet it down. And if you look at the trade rhetoric that we've seen since the beginning of this administration, there's been a pattern. We saw this with China. We've seen it in other instances where there's been the threat of tariffs. There's been the threat of retaliatory measures. And then you've seen that rhetoric de-escalate because the repercussions for the U.S. could be quite severe. You know, a country such as Canada and the European Union are coming out and saying we will place tariffs on agricultural products that will absolutely hit the Trump heartland. And you start to see de-escalation coming as a result of that.
So what do you see playing out? How do you think, I mean, will this result, do you think, in a trade war and something that really will hurt Americans? Or do you think this will even out in some type of negotiation?
What I would hope is everyone is so heavily incentivized to try to make sure we don't descend into a trade war environment. But I think what this does point into, there are certain global organizations such as the World Trade Organization, of which the United States was a founding father, which serve to try to mitigate situations such as these. And what one would hope is that efforts will now get redirected away from Twitter and towards really fixing some of these institutions to try and make the global organization.
Before I let you go, they're not getting away from Twitter because Donald Tusk, the president of the EU, he responded to Peter Navarro, who was on Fox News Sunday earlier today, when Navarro said there's a special place in hell for people like Justin Trudeau. Well, there's the Twitter from Donald Tusk saying there's a special place in heaven for Justin Trudeau. Canada, thank you for the perfect organization of the G7. So I guess they're not getting away from Twitter no matter who you are.
I guess that's right.
All right. That's so goes world diplomacy. Ann Barry, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Martha?
Eric and Ann, thank you. A long-awaited Justice Department watchdog report being released this week. What it's expected to say about the department and the FBI's handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation.
This is going to be a very thorough report. It's been a long time in the making. I know the Inspector General has examined thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of documents to get to this point. And I think it's going to shed a lot of light.